It's been 20 years now since American and coalition forces have invaded Iraq on a mission to topple Saddam Hussein's dictatorship and find weapons of mass destruction. Within 3 weeks, Saddam's regime had fallen, but no stockpiles of nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons were ever found. By the time U.S. troops left in 2011, the insurgency that followed the invasion had claimed the lives of more than 100,000 Iraqi civilians, while U.S. losses reached nearly 4,500. Now, a semblance of normalcy has returned, but Iraq still battles a range of challenges, from political instability to poverty and rampant corruption. Our next report takes a look at today's Iraq.
Shock and awe. The Iraq War started with a barrage, explosions lighting up Baghdad on the banks of the Tigris River by night. Soon, U.S. troops were moving into the city, and they intended to topple dictator Saddam Hussein in a very literal way. This is that same square 20 years later, bustling with traffic, modern hotels, and fountains. The city is a far cry from the war-torn place that the name Baghdad evokes after more than a decade of sectarian violence that killed tens of thousands. But despite the relative peace of recent years, many are still troubled.
Currently, the situation is the same. There's no difference between the current regime and the previous one. When you want to speak or demand your rights, they confront you with weapons and killing. It's no different from the previous regime. We assumed that Iraq got rid of the tyrant Saddam Hussein and the country would be in better shape, but it was one tragedy after another. Saddam is gone, but we got 1,000 other Saddams.
But not everyone feels despair.
I have faith that the youth are the ones who come up with the ideas. The youth are the ones who lead the revolution. The youth are the foundation, and the best proof of that is the protests that happened in 2019. We saw the youth lead the protests. That gave me a bit of hope.
Baghdad still suffers from widespread poverty, despite Iraq's great oil wealth. Before, it was stolen by Saddam Hussein. Now, the oil money still doesn't make it into regular people's pockets.
Iraq is still the same, and nothing has changed. Citizens hoped for something better, but there's no change.
There's no more shock and awe, just a widespread feeling that things could have, and should have, gone much better.
More, I'm joined now by journalist Owen Holdaway, who's based in the Middle East. Owen, Iraq today is a far different place from the one American soldiers invaded in 2003. Tell us how life has changed for Iraqis over the past 20 years.
I mean, in terms of civil liberties, they've obviously got a lot more freedom in that sense. There's a lot more open discussion. I think the real legacy, though, of the U.S. invasion was the sectarian and the corrupt system, the governance that the U.S. really instituted after the fall of the Ba'athist regime. They're essentially still living with that legacy, and that creates a lot of difficulties in terms of rebuilding and reconstruction. Here in Mosul, for instance, there has been some reconstruction, but there's still some very difficult issues in terms of dispersion of funds from central Baghdad, as well as the overall overarching sort of desperation, I would say, amongst a lot of people, and particularly amongst a significant portion of the youth population who simply don't have very good economic opportunities in this new Iraq.
What about moving forward? How do Iraqis see their prospects? Are they generally optimistic about the country's future?
It's a mixed picture. It really does depend on who you're speaking to and where you're speaking from. I think in general, I think the difficulties, particularly in northern Iraq and Mosul, where I'm at the moment, they've come through the horrific war against the Islamic State. Although that was actually 5 years ago, they're still reconstructing and rebuilding against that. I think the general tension towards the prospect of another civil war, I think, is very, very unlikely. I think they've gone down that road. followed. A lot really, I think, will depend on if the political system can be changed. I think the real interesting movement was the so-called Tashreen movement, which came in late 2019, and that protest movement was very non-sectarian and called for political change. However, it didn't manage to really change the political structures. Essentially, the parliamentary elections that followed were largely musical chairs of other Shia parties taking in seats that they were trying to get their non-sectarian candidates elected to. I think if Iraq could move more down that line, there would be potential for a more prosperous Iraq, and one not so plagued with the endemic corruption. But a lot really depends on changing the political system in Iraq.
What are the main concerns that Iraqis have right now, Owen? Is it corruption, or is it security, foreign interference?
I think corruption is definitely the number one issue. Security is an issue in some areas. Anbar, some areas of Nineveh, there are still ISIS sleeper cells to do carry out sporadic attacks. But I think the corruption, which really feeds into other elements of the economy, the ability, for longer term planning, the ability to get jobs, the ability to create businesses and various things like that, is really hindered by the level of political corruption, which really feeds into all other aspects. And I think if the Iraqis can address that, which I think fundamentally they really do want to, and the movement, the Tashreen movement, protest movement, which was very much focused as an anti-corruption movement, could address that, I think a lot of the issues of Iraq could be solved. But it's an extremely large hurdle to overcome.
Owen, thank you very much. That was journalist Owen Holdaway, journalist joining us from Mosul, Iraq.